Shipping from China is always a bit of a pain. At the time of writing, my Magic X 135 unit has been sent back to China, all because of an easily fixable address error, which nobody realised needed to be easily fixed until it was far too late. But we're often seeing packages being in transit for such a long time that it's easy to think that the slow boat from China is actually a guy in a dinghy who stops every few miles to fish. But strangely enough, the one product that I didn't have a problem with was the Ayaneo Pocket Air Mini. And that's not to say that there weren't delays, but the first backers received their units just after Christmas. Mine arrived on the 27th, and I was one of the first, 50 or so to place an order. Now, that's not really a long time to wait. I mentioned the 135. This released around about the same time with no crowdfunding, and they're just shipping out now. Various devices across the year have gone on sale with similar timeframes, so I didn't find the shipping of the Pocket Air Mini that unusual. But it does play into the idea that Ayaneo are a company with logistical problems. You might say that they lack shelf respect. There are legitimate concerns about customer service, about manufacturing, product support, about shipping, and it would be remiss of me not to mention that. I am fully aware of the Retro Handheld recent commentary on this and the issues that were brought up on community forums. Conversely, I think they've actually made some brilliant devices this year, things that I would love to have been talking about. It would have been fantastic to have a look at and review these units, but I can't afford them. I just can't afford to do it. The Pocket Air Mini is affordable, though. And it's also available now from multiple retailers now that the Indiegogo campaign has gone. And if you do want to buy one, I'll leave a link to Acnus, I think it's called, in the description, which is not an affiliate link at all. I think it's worth judging these devices on their own merit. And this might be my only chance to get an Ayaneo in my hands anytime soon. And I'm actually really excited about this thing. So here we are. This is the Ayaneo Pocket Air Mini. It's a tiny Android handheld with a price tag that seems too good to be true. It's everything that we've assumed we wouldn't be able to get for this price point. But is it really any good? Let's find out if this is something that you should definitely pocket or a mini inconvenience. I'm going to let the cat out of the bag here. I absolutely adore this thing. I've got so many handhelds now and I don't use most of them. I buy most of them to review and then they sit on this little basket thing I've got by the computer and they just gather dust. But every so often you get something that you just want to keep picking up. The Thor was one for me, the Brick Hammer, the 34XXSP, and now the Ayaneo Pocket Air Mini. It's a lovely little device. So let's start with what you actually get when you buy this thing, because the box for the Air Mini is actually surprisingly good. It's the kind of packaging that whispers premium before you even open it. Inside, you've got the console, a USB cable, a QR code for a PDF manual, which you'll never read, and a pre-applied screen protector covered with a protective film. But that film is stuck to the screen with what I can only call industrial strength spite. You need 2 thumbs to hold the protector down whilst peeling the film, which requires coordination, usually reserved for people who can pat their head, rub their stomach, and feed the dog at the same time. I ended up just ripping the whole thing off, which was probably a much more satisfying experience, to be fair. But the moment you pick up the device itself, all of that just goes out of the window. This thing feels expensive. Now, I'm told that it doesn't feel quite as expensive as the full-price Ayaneo handheld, but you know what? I don't care about this because this is brilliant. It's got a really lovely texture to it. It doesn't feel too heavy, but it does feel substantial. And it sits in the hand. It's like it was built for your exact proportions. Although now that I've said that, I know somebody's going to come into the comments and say that they can't use this unless they've got some sort of grip. But that's just the poetic irony of the internet for you. The build quality here is excellent. There's no creaking or flexing. There's no sense that corners were cut to fit a price point. It feels like a proper premium device. It's quite small. It's about the same height as the TrimUI Smart Pro S, but it's narrower because obviously the screen is narrower. But this fits nicely into a jacket pocket, and it's light enough that you're not going to cause yourself a prolapse from carrying it around. Trust me, look, as I get older, this sort of thing becomes more of a possibility. What you've got is a really lovely unit with a 4.2-inch 1280 by 960 LCD display. It's running a MediaTek G90T, and it's actually running that despite the internet worry. You've got two configurations, 2 gig of RAM with 32 gig of storage, or 3 gig of RAM with 64 gig of storage. All this runs on Android 11 with 5 gig Wi-Fi, Bluetooth 5.0, Hall effect controls, and active cooling. Now, a word before we get into specs proper. I've got the 3 gig version here with 64 gig of storage, and that isn't much to install apps and games. The 32 gig storage version is only really any good if your favourite game is looking at the full bar in the settings menu. You literally can't install large games like Genshin Impact. So if you're looking at this, I would advise to get the top model every single time. Now, the 4.2-inch display is gorgeous. It's 4x3, and that's the kind of entire point from this device. Most retro games were designed for 4x3 displays. SNES, PlayStation, N64. On a widescreen handheld, you get the black bars at the sides, or distorted graphics that make Mario look like he got caught in the spaghetti making machine. But here, those games fit the screen perfectly, as they were meant to be seen. It's absolutely glorious. Now look, of course, this isn't the only device that has 4x3 as an aspect ratio, but this is one of the most powerful for this price point. And I keep looking at this device and I keep thinking, well, there's got to be something somewhere where they've actually scrimped on construction, and you know what? I can't find it. Both analog sticks use Hall effect sensors, which means there's going to be no stick drift at all. They're smooth, they're responsive, they feel really premium. Some people say that playing modern twin-stick shooters can feel cramped or awkward. Well, I'm more used to the PS2 controllers, and I didn't find this at all. I actually found this quite a nice way of playing games. The D-pad is excellent as well. It's not too clicky or too loud, and it's precise enough to pass the Kirby Pancake test, TM. It's a real joy for 16-bit platformers. The face buttons are similarly excellent. There's a little bit of travel, a little bit of tactile feedback, and they are very, very quiet. And if there is a downside, it's that there's a little bit too much play, making them just a tad wobbly. But that really isn't something that I worry about in everyday use. The shoulder buttons are light and quiet. There are 2 additional buttons on top that you might think could be mapped to RetroArch hotkeys. They can't. The OS has locked them to specific Android functions, I think, so RetroArch doesn't recognize them as mappable inputs. It's a waste of perfectly good buttons, and I don't really understand why Ayaneo made this decision. Now, the triggers are analog, which means that they've got a full range of motion rather than just being on-off switches. They've got an even response across the whole travel, which is great for games like Gran Turismo 4. They're not the most comfortable if you want to use the shoulder buttons and the triggers at the same time, but it is doable. Personally, I'm quite comfortable just using one finger and switching between them, but your mileage may vary depending on what you want to play. You've got active cooling here as well, which is nice to see on a more powerful device, and I was quite surprised that even on maximum performance mode, it doesn't seem too intrusive. It is a little bit whiny the more that you get up the level, but it's a level of whine I can live with. During normal gameplay, I actually didn't notice it at all. One thing to note is the button layout. Start and select are on the left side of this device, which is unusual, and a lot of users are used to devices with buttons on the right. I've already seen people saying that they've accidentally closed down games, and to be honest, I've done that a few times myself. You get used to it after a while, but it can be a little bit annoying when you just forget, or you've been playing something else and you come from a different console and play this, and all of a sudden, You've got one USB port that handles charging and whatever else you need to plug in, except for video. There's no video out on this device. You've got a 3.5mm headphone jack as well, which is always nice to see. The battery life is pretty solid. I've been getting about 4 to 5 hours of gaming on this. If you crank up the brightness and the performance, however, that changes. I noticed a drain of about 1% every few minutes, which means that you're looking at closer to 3.5 hours when you're really pushing the hardware. But the big talking point here is the performance. The Pocket Air Mini uses a MediaTek Helio G90T processor with 2GB of RAM in its base model. The chip is about 6 years old now, but for an older chip it really pulls its weight. For 8-bit and 16-bit systems, this thing is flawless. Perfect emulation, no slowdowns, no issues whatsoever. You can crank up the resolution multipliers, apply shaders and filters, and it doesn't seem to break a sweat. I've been using the CRT Geom shaders for consoles and the LCD3 filter for handhelds, and the screen handles them beautifully. Game Boy Advance games in particular look stunning with an LCD grid applied to it, and actually the dimensions of the screen don't impact that too much. You just get a little black line at the top and bottom. And the resolution scales well as too. There's no uneven pixels or shimmering. This is an excellent device for those systems. PlayStation runs at 2 or 3x resolution depending on what game, with no problems. I've tested Final Fantasy VII, Crash Bandicoot, Gran Turismo 2, and they're all running perfectly when they're upscaled. It's the same story with Nintendo 64, though you do need to use the Mupin 64 Plus FZ standalone app rather than the RetroArch Core. The RetroArch Core struggles, but the standalone app handles it brilliantly. Dreamcast really impressed me. Most games run perfectly. I tested Crazy Taxi, Soul Calibur, Jet Set Radio with no issues. Demanding titles like Crazy Taxi 2 work best with the Redream standalone emulator and the device on performance mode, but they do run. PSP runs very well as well, and at a 2x upscale, and that's kind of the sweet spot for this screen size. The problem is PSP is a widescreen console, which means on a smaller screen, the black bars at the top and bottom are quite intrusive. And for that reason, I wouldn't recommend this as a PSP console. I also tested Sega Saturn, and Saturn is notoriously difficult to emulate. Sega Rally runs smoothly, Panzer Dragoon works well. It's not perfect for the whole library, but it is a solid experience. As for PS2 and GameCube, this is the ceiling. You'll be able to play about half the library pretty well, perhaps more if you're willing to tinker with settings, but it's best to keep expectations low and be surprised by your successes. Final Fantasy X, Kingdom Hearts, Dragon Quest VIII all work beautifully. God of War 2 runs if you enable underclocking, which does add some input lag into the mix, but it does make it playable. Raiden 3, Champions of Norath is playable. The Sly Cooper games, however, are best ignored to avoid disappointment. But if you stick to the lighter titles, you should be fine. GameCube is similar, although a little bit of a mixed bag. The problem with the Mali GPUs in the Air Mini is that it doesn't handle Vulkan particularly well. And there's no custom graphics driver like you get with the Snapdragon things. You're forced to use OpenGL, meaning that the device can't perform as well as it would on a Vulkan backend. You don't need to do that with everything. Some games work perfectly well on Vulkan, but if you get graphical glitches, OpenGL is the only way to go. For PlayStation 2, this doesn't matter much because NetherSX2 doesn't have the ability to load those custom drivers anyway. But for something like GameCube, you're much better using the Magni Air X because that will allow you to use turnip drivers on its Snapdragon 662 processor. Having said that, Metroid Prime runs, you just have to accept there's going to be some limitations. Games like Metroid Prime 2 and F-Zero GX have glitches and slowdown, which makes them not really worth playing. Mario Kart Double Dash can't maintain 60 frames a second on OpenGL, but it's actually quite playable. 3DS also suffers from that Vulkan problem. Games run and some run very well, but I'd recommend the Citra MMJ fork rather than Azuha. And even then, it's better to swap screens than cram 2 onto this 4x3 display. And that makes games like Kid Icarus Uprising unplayable. If you're buying this to play 3DS, PS2 and GameCube games, you're going to have a mixed experience. Some games are going to work perfectly, others won't run at all, and you'll spend a lot of time tweaking settings and swapping between emulators to find the combination that works. But here's the thing, nobody should really be buying a $90 handheld and expecting flawless PS2 and GameCube emulation. That's just not realistic. The fact that this runs any of those games is a bonus. What this device is genuinely brilliant at is everything up to that, including Dreamcast. And for that, this is exceptional. The out-of-the-box software experience is very bare bones. It's stock Android with Ayaneo's launcher on top of it. You'll have to install everything from scratch yourself, and that means setting up RetroArch and some other standalone emulators depending on what you want to play, and probably choosing a new launcher as well. For most people considering this system, this isn't going to be a big problem. But if you're expecting a plug-in-and-play Linux-like experience, then I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. The Ayaneo launcher itself is functional, but unremarkable. I opened it once, looked around for a bit, decided it wasn't for me, and I haven't used it since. The thing is, you don't really need to. You've got a nice pop-out window to change things like performance and fan modes or controller settings during gameplay. Just install your favourite launcher on top of that and you're good to go. So other than performance, you might not think that there's any reason to pick this up. But since I've had this device, I can't put it down. This Christmas I've had the RGDS, the 476H, the TrimUI Smart Pro S to play with. But there's something about the look and feel, the experience of using this device, which is incredibly comfortable to hold. It's not too heavy, it's got a lovely rounded shape to the back, which seems to fit my hands perfectly. The sticks, although they might be small, actually feel just about right for the unit. They're recessed into the unit, so whilst you've got a lot of travel, it doesn't feel like your thumbs are sticking out on stalks. And the buttons and the D-pad, they're nice and responsive. There's just something about this that feels premium, that feels beyond what I was expecting even for an Ayaneo device. And on top of that, the screen is absolutely gorgeous, and it can handle playing with shaders that enhance that experience. If you primarily want to play 8-bit and 16-bit retro games or titles from the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64 era, then I think this is one of the best options under $100. If you want to play PS2 and GameCube games and you're on a really strict budget, you've got the option of either this or the Mangmi Air X. And to be honest, I'd probably go with this one just because I'm having a better experience overall. And a good part of the reason for that is the 4x3 screen, which is just perfect for the sort of games that you are going to want to play. Now, obviously, PlayStation 2 and GameCube are kind of compromised experiences. They are on the Mangmi as well, I should point out. But for the price that you're paying for this thing, to be able to get anything from those libraries to run is an absolute miracle. So my recommendation here is this. If you're comfortable with the trade-offs and you want a premium retro experience for under $100, then buy this because it is excellent. And the link in the description will get you one from a reputable retailer. But if you want solid PlayStation 2 and GameCube performance that plays the vast majority of the catalogue, possibly all of the catalogue, then keep your money and save it for something like the Anbernic 477V or 477M, which plays those catalogues so much better. And at that point, you're then moving into, Retroid Pocket 6 and even AYN Thor territory. But this really is the most power that you're going to get for this budget price. And for that, this should be absolutely lauded. I'm really glad I bought this. It's made me think quite a lot about what we're willing to accept from companies in exchange for good hardware at low prices. And I don't really have a neat answer to that question. You know what? I suspect that you don't either. If you found this review helpful, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe, and I genuinely love to hear people's thoughts in the comments below. Please don't make them all about how bad Ayaneo is, because I'd like to talk about the device rather than that. There'll be other options, other experiences, other times when we can talk about the bigger issues. And whilst you're down there in the comments, why not leave a like as well? Thanks ever so much for watching, and until next time, happy gaming.